This is not a statement about spiritual principles. This is not a statement about who is God, or the nature of God, or the nature of the soul, or our relationship with God. It's a statement about human psychology. And as such, now, we also have a situation here where the purport goes far beyond what is in the actual verse. And so I think it's an interesting point because, of course, we are followers of Prabhupada. We do follow Prabhupada. And Skype, since we both hear Ustream and Skype. Do we need to turn off the Skype? We hear. Oh, what you can do on your Skype is, do you need to turn off the Skype? Is it a problem that you can hear both? I mean, is you having trouble hearing? If you turn off the Skype, then I can't see you, so it's always fun to see the people you're talking to, especially to make, I can tell whether you're laughing at my jokes or not. So, then if you're not laughing at my jokes, then of course I'll chastise you. So, here, the verse does not say that whenever there's divorce, it's usually the woman's fault. And the verse also doesn't really say weakness. That's also Prabhupada's word. So, although there is a word for women in Sanskrit, abala, which means weak, not strong. And so, just trying to find out in Sydney whether we're still connected to Sydney. Varanayak. So I was just wondering in Sydney whether you can still hear. Is it okay? So, what do we do in a situation where, on the one hand, Prabhupada has told us that his authority, Prabhupada said actually hundreds of times, his authority comes from the fact that he's simply repeating scriptures. In Sydney, are you okay there? Would you rather just go on Ustream and not Skype? Okay. Anyway, I'll just continue speaking the class. A situation where, on the one hand, Prabhupada said many, many, many times that his authority comes from the fact that he's repeating Shastra, and then in his purports he may say something which is not exactly in the Sanskrit verse. So there are different verses in the Bhagavatam that speak about the weaknesses of men, their pride, the weaknesses of women, and so on. So here you have Prabhupada making a statement on the cause of divorce or cause of separation, saying that in most cases where men and women separate, it's the woman's fault or it's due to womanly weakness. So as followers of Prabhupada, we take that as an infallible statement. To what extent do we look at science? To what extent do we consider our own life experience? And let's say if someone's a leader in the Hare Krishna movement, has to do marriage counseling, and our own experience of men and women that have separated, and why they separate, and so on. So, And then also, another point, just to sort of lay everything out on the table, it's a very interesting story where, of course, Sati went to her father's house, Daksha's house, and then Lord Shiva, Daksha insulted his son-in-law Shiva, and Sati, therefore, committed suicide, or at least she burned up her body by yoga fire. And then Lord Shiva didn't appreciate at all what had happened. He came and just started killing people. So, of course, Lord Shiva is a great personality. Lord Shiva is a great personality, and to offend him is a very great offense. At the same time, here's a problem between in a family. It's a family problem between the father and his son-in-law, and of course we can't imitate this behavior of Lord Shiva, but it is, what I'm getting at is, if we look at other religions in the world, we sometimes find in scriptures, the Bible or whatever, Quran, a certain justification of violence at a certain level, which many people in the world are not comfortable with. Oh, thank you, Varnayaka. I'm glad you can hear me and see me. So, for example, well, I just said in the Bible, in the Quran, and other scriptures, so many intelligent people probably would not be comfortable with the idea that if your father-in-law insults your wife, go and cut his head off. I mean, imagine if people actually did this. Imagine if people actually went and murdered other people. Well, the unfortunate thing is they do. I mean, a certain sort of, I don't want to say healthy percentage, but a certain large percentage of murders take place among people that know each other. Family things where, problems in the family and someone shoots the people in their family. This, of course, has been developed to a fine art in the United States. And the United States, in addition to exporting basketball and Coca-Cola, also has given the world other valuable gifts such as serial killing. But anyway, so there are these crimes of passion. So Lord Shiva, now what about Sati's behavior? I mean, Sati's behavior was extreme. You could say, I'm not saying it's wrong, or it was the wrong thing to do. She went, the Bhagavatam here clearly says she was vimudhadi, her mind was bewildered, and she should not have left her husband and gone to, I mean, it's certainly an unforgettable lesson for a wife not to run back home when you're unnecessarily. But she goes back to her family, she's insulted, and worse, Lord Shiva's insulted, and she decides to commit suicide. Now we know that we can follow great souls, but we can't imitate them. Clearly this is behavior that we should not imitate. But just in understanding how to present Krishna consciousness to so-called educated people, to give an example of the problem this might be for educated people, one of the most famous Western philosophers, Plato, in his most famous book, The Republic, gives his reasons as to why he is rejecting basically the main books of Greece, which were the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, the Trojan War and all that stuff, this was really the centerpiece of Greek education. Now, interestingly, Greece, during its sort of pagan period, you could say, didn't really have a holy scripture. They didn't have a Bible. They didn't have a Bhagavad Gita or a Bible, what you call like a holy book. They did have these books. They wrote a lot of books. But the Iliad and the Odyssey, they weren't like sacred, infallible scriptures, but they were really kind of the center of Greek culture. And therefore, it's shocking when in the Republic, Plato said that we shouldn't read these books. Children should not be allowed to read these books in schools. Why? because they give a very strange picture of the gods and goddesses. They depict the goddesses in a way, the gods and goddesses in a way which makes them almost not compare favorably to, let's say, a decent moral human being. And so here we have a story. I mean, certainly, let's say those ladies out there in the audience, if you're still there after hearing about all of your weaknesses, let's say if you're married, if one of you women, let's say you're married, and you go to your father's house because they're having some kind of big affair, and your father doesn't like your husband and doesn't receive you properly and kind of insults your husband. I mean, and then I would say don't kill yourself over it. I mean, that's the kind of advice anyone would give. Well, don't kill yourself. I mean, it's not such a big... Just if you don't like what's going on, just leave. I mean, you could say Sati might have just left and said, you know, you guys are creeps. And for those in Australia, creep is a word used in America. It's a derogatory word. So Sati could have said, you guys are a bunch of creeps. I'm out of here. But rather she took I think what must be considered an extreme measure, and she committed suicide because her father insulted her husband. Of course, her husband was the great Lord Shiva, who's a great personality, and I'm not saying that she did the wrong thing, but it is an extreme act to kill yourself because your father doesn't like your husband. And then when Lord Shiva heard about Sati's extreme act, he engaged in an act which also probably would be taken as somewhat extreme. I mean, imagine if a lady went home to her father's house for some affair, some big thing that was going on, and her father insulted her husband, so the lady killed herself right there in the middle of the family party. The lady just killed herself, burned herself alive, and then when the husband found out what happened, he comes to his father-in-law's house and cuts his head off, and just starts killing large numbers of people and, you know, mutilating people. It's on the human level, not among great souls like Shiva and Sati, but on the human level, it's not what civilized human beings do. And so, of course, then that famous distinction is made in the Bhagavatam that we must follow great souls but not imitate them. And so clearly this would be in the imitation category. If any of the men out there think that if your wife doesn't get a good reception from her parents and her parents criticize you as the husband, that she should kill herself and you should go kill them, probably not a great idea. And so, of course, Lord Shiva is a great soul, and then in Prabhupada's purport, he's saying how when men and women separate, when there's divorce, it's usually the woman's fault. Now, what do we do, for example, if that's not our personal experience? If our personal experience is that it tends to be men and women. Well, let me give you an example. In Sanskrit, the word for sexuality, or just like boy-girl stuff, is mituni or maitunya, which in Sanskrit literally means mutuality. In fact, the English word mutuality is probably connected linguistically with the Sanskrit word maitunya, mutuality. And so at least in Sanskrit, or frankly in the Bhagavatam, I think if you look at the Bhagavatam, you will not find a statement in the Bhagavatam that when men and women separate, it's generally the woman's fault. I don't think there's a statement like that in the Bhagavatam, or in the Gita, or in any other important scripture. So, my experience with Prabhupada's books is that Prabhupada, now get back to the point of Sati and Lord Shiva. In Prabhupada's books, he often states things categorically, although in other places he may say something else on the same subject. And a lot of times you have to sort of build a composite picture to see what his complete view is on something. We were just discussing in a class we just had in Brazil that I think in the 5th canto in a purport, Prabhupada says that a woman that doesn't get married is a prostitute. Now, there are two issues here. Number one, in his purport to the Bhagavatam, verse 1.5.11, Prabhupada says that he's presenting Krishna consciousness in a foreign language. There will be many literary discrepancies and language discrepancies. And that's true. I mean, Prabhupada's books had to be, in terms of English style, heavily edited. And also in terms of language, first of all, in India, and also in ISKCON to some extent, and maybe other places, the word prostitute is often used to mean someone who's promiscuous. In other words, if a woman is loose in her connections with men, they may call her prostitute, but technically prostitute means a woman who rents out her body, or, sells the pleasures of her body for money. Or I guess there's also a barter system in some cultures. So a woman, let's say, who's somewhat promiscuous is not technically a prostitute, which is a commercial term. But apart from that, there are many women that don't get married for other reasons. As I said in Brazil, some women don't get married because they finally figured out what we men are really like, and that's probably enough to convince anyone not to get married. Anyway, so some women don't get married because they can't find a qualified husband. Some women don't get married because they actually enjoy just living peacefully in their own way and don't want to get married. Some women don't get married because they had traumatic experiences as children, perhaps with an abusive father or whatever, and they just it's just unnatural, difficult for them. It's difficult for them to enter into that kind of relationship. Some women don't get married because they're born with a gross body and subtle body, which have, sort of go different ways. So maybe they're not inclined toward men. Some women don't. I mean, women may not get married for many, many reasons. Some women are just don't have very much sex desire or aren't very romantic. Some women are very romantic. And so there are many, many, many reasons why some women don't get married. Here Prabhupada makes a simple categorical statement: a woman that doesn't get married is a prostitute. And we know that there are some women in the world, there actually are some women that don't get married because they enjoy having multiple relationships, but that may not be most women who don't get married. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, on the one hand, we are followers of Prabhupada, we do follow Prabhupada, we do accept his statements as true, and on the other hand, we have to understand Prabhupada's statements in a way which is actually reasonable. For example, Prabhupada says women like men are expert at rape, and that's one of the more popular statements in our books. Again, Prabhupada says in the purport 1.5.11 there will be language problems. So, in terms of what does the word rape mean, or what connotations, denotations, and connotations does it have? Oh. That's Giri Hari trying to tell me something. So, let's see. Oh, there we go. So, at the same, Prabhupada said religion without philosophy is fanaticism or sentimentalism. Now, there are certain statements which are in the scriptures, such as the nature of God, the nature of the soul, how society should be organized in terms of varnashram. These are sort of universal, powerful statements in scriptures, and Prabhupada teaches those things very clearly and effectively. There are other statements or other areas which are, you could say, mundane sociology, psychology. Now, Chanakya Pandit is not Shastra. Chanakya Pandit is not scripture. And there are certain areas of life where we now have reliable science. Prabhupada did not reject science. What Prabhupada rejected was scientism. Scientism is a word in English which means sort of a fanatical belief in or justification of science, which goes beyond what is reasonable. An example of scientism is saying that life comes from matter. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that consciousness or life originally come from matter. We have a circumstantial relationship, as the philosopher Hume pointed out. So, science though is actually a good thing. Science is a good thing. And as far as, for example, how intelligent are women? The intelligence of women or the intelligence of men or the intelligence of, I don't know, reptiles, I mean, you can study that nowadays. Those are things that you can really scientifically study. It's not demonic science. It's just science. It's real science. For example, Prabhupada was personally not inclined to get much exercise, just the way he was, the culture he grew up in. He wasn't inclined to get much exercise until a doctor in New York kind of chastised him in an affectionate way and said, you've got to get exercise because Prabhupada had a heart attack. Prabhupada changed his lifestyle because the doctor told him something. He didn't say, that's karmi science, or he started taking morning walks. That's why Prabhupada started doing morning walks, because the doctor told him he had to. That's science. So, science can study male and female intelligence, and we can get reliable information about that. So nowadays, people are not going to believe something about gendered intelligence, male or female intelligence, because Chanakya Pandit, who was not even really a Vaishnava necessarily, and his works aren't Shastra, because Chanakya Pandit says something. People want to know what's scientific. Frankly, I want to know what's scientific. And so, if you study men and women, there are differences. Men and women are different. Actually, the French have a funny saying. The French say, vive la différence, long live the difference. But anyway, men and women are different. And in some ways, men are more intelligent. In some ways, women may be more intelligent. For one thing, nowadays, in the modern world, to say that you're more intelligent, that this person's more intelligent than that person, is a tricky thing, because intelligence in science nowadays is not really spoken of in the singular. We have to ask the question, do you mean artistic intelligence, emotional intelligence, mathematical intelligence, philosophical intelligence, spiritual intelligence, organizational intelligence? What intelligence are we talking about? So, the blanket statement, A is more intelligent than B, is not really the way that intelligence is dealt with in the modern world. That's why, for example, in America, when people take these college entrance examinations, there are different sections. There's a language section, whatever your native language is. There's a mathematical section. There may be an essay question. The reason they have all these different tests is because there's different kinds of intelligence. So this is not something the demons say or something the karmis say. It's just the real world. In the real world, there are different kinds of intelligence. And for example, there are many cases that I've seen where a husband and wife break up because the woman wants to be a devotee of Krishna and the man doesn't. So does that mean, is that the woman's weakness, that she wants to be a devotee? Or what about a woman who doesn't get married because there's not an appropriate arrangement? Is she a prostitute, of all things? What if she's not a prostitute? What if she's just a secretary or a manicurist or a medical doctor or a truck driver? So again, the point I'm trying to make is, I believe that we must accept Prabhupada, we must follow and serve Prabhupada, but we must understand him in a reasonable way that does not turn us into irrational fanatics. who say things which just aren't true. So I believe that's what we have to do. It is actually our duty to Prabhupada. And when Prabhupada said that what I'm saying is true because I am not inventing anything, I'm not concocting anything. As we all know, Prabhupada said this many, many, many times. I'm not inventing anything, I'm not concocting anything, I'm simply repeating what is in Scripture. So I personally take that very seriously. When Prabhupada says that, I really believe it. I take it seriously. And therefore, I believe Prabhupada is telling me that I am speaking from an absolute platform when I am quoting Shastra, when I am delivering to you what I have heard from the Parampara. In those moments, my speaking is infallible. Prabhupada was directly asked, point blank, are pure devotees omniscient? And he thought that was a silly question. Of course not. To be a pure devotee doesn't mean omniscient. It doesn't mean you know everything about the material world. So when there are statements which, A, are about the material world, not spiritual things, and B, are not from Scripture, are those statements infallible and absolute? Personally, I don't think they are, not because I don't have faith in Prabhupada, but just the opposite, because I do have faith in Prabhupada, and that's what he taught us. So, in other words, the simple question is, do we apply Prabhupada's teachings to everything in the universe except him? Does Prabhupada himself, does Prabhupada's position, does he stand outside of his own teachings so that you cannot apply Prabhupada's teachings to Prabhupada? If we don't apply Prabhupada's teachings to Prabhupada, what is our authority for coming to a certain understanding of Prabhupada? If you say, well, he told us that, okay, but he told us to read his books, he told us to read the Scriptures, he told us that he's infallible when he's quoting Shastra or repeating something from Parampara. So, someone could say that, well, for example, Prabhupada often said that there's polygamy in Vedic culture because the female population is always greater. Now, if you go down to your corner store in Sydney or anywhere else and buy an almanac, the almanac, and look up the populations of many different countries, you'll find that, in fact, there are many countries where the female population is not greater. And often, the female population is greater because women live longer. The men are dead. I mean, the women live longer in general, and so therefore among older people there's more women because they live longer. But if you look at men and women of marriageable age, which for me say like 15 to 45 roughly or whatever, you'll find that in many countries there are not more women than men. Now, as far as polygamy itself is concerned, we have irrefutable evidence that in Vedic culture it was a problem. The Vedic culture tends to be inclusive and adapt to reality rather than just generate massive hypocrisy. The Christian strategy was kind of very high principles and massive hypocrisy. The Vedic strategy has tended to be more reasonable principles, less hypocrisy. Now, the irrefutable evidence that polygamy was always problematic in Vedic culture, there are two types of evidence. One is linguistic. The word co-wife in Sanskrit is sapatni. Interestingly, the same word, sapatni, sapatna, means enemy. Enemy. So what does that tell you if the word for co-wife also means enemy? And what does that tell you? Also, in the 6th canto, we find King Chitraketu finally, with millions of wives, had one son, and his co-wives murdered the child, infanticide, right there in the Bhagavatam. Murdering a baby. Why? Polygamy. The whole Ramayana. Why was Ram banished? Why did Dasharatha die? Why? Very simple. Polygamy. Why did Pandu die? Polygamy. So you have some of the, because he was chasing his second wife when he died. So you have all these cases where polygamy is actually a disaster. And yet it was allowed because people can do it anyway. I mean, if you look at the modern world, I know in Australia, everyone in Australia, even the non-devotees, everyone is celibate outside marriage. Probably hear you laughing all the way from Sydney, even without a microphone. But the fact is now, there's massive adultery, there's massive promiscuity in the modern world. So in the Vedic culture, they had a particular strategy or a particular... And polygamy we find mostly among Kshatriyas anyway. And if you know political history, look at King Henry VIII. I mean, my God. It's the rule. It's more often than not, political leaders have all kinds of affairs. In fact, in America, it just came out now, one of our former candidates for president, John Edwards, who was, one of his strong points was he's such a family man, good family values, and he just admitted an adulterous affair. So it's kind of real-world principles. But, so the Bhagavatam, what it often does, or this Vedic culture, say, okay, you're going to do this anyway, so at least regulate it, like wine, liquor shops. But then there's so many stories showing it's really a disaster. So polygamy was never a great idea. I mean, it never really worked that well. The female population is not really greater in many countries. So, in the modern world, I believe we have to present Krishna consciousness in a reasonable way and allow Prabhupada to define himself. Now, there's an interesting tendency, if you study the history of religions, that the followers of a great spiritual teacher want to glorify him, and in their enthusiasm to glorify him, they actually reject what this person said about themselves. Now, an extraordinary example of this is Jesus Christ. In the 4th century, the Common Era, 4th century, about 300 years after Jesus, the Christian world was basically divided into two camps. The Trinitarians, the people who believed in Father, Son, Holy Ghost, all three of them are God, and so on, that amazing concoction. And then the people who said, wait a second, if you read what Jesus actually said, if you read the New Testament, every time Jesus talks about God and his relationship to God, in every case, Jesus presents himself as being subordinate to, less than God. So therefore, Jesus is not fully man, fully God. That's not at all what he said about himself. And none of the people that actually lived with Jesus, camped out with Jesus, sat around the campfire with Jesus as he was traveling around Palestine, none of his personal followers ever, in their wildest dreams, imagined that he was God. So this idea that Jesus is God came when the movement basically spread into outside of Israel, around the Roman Empire, and in the pagan world, you wouldn't be taken seriously unless you had a human being that became God, or a god. Julius Caesar became a god after he died. Augustus Caesar became a god. That was just the way they did things back then. If you were a great human being, then you become a deity when you die. So therefore, when Jesus died, in order to compete, they had to make him a deity. But what's interesting here is that by the end of the 4th century, when the Trinitarians, through various, mostly by political means and military means, by basically persecuting people that didn't agree with you, when the Trinitarians won, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, it became a crime. It became a crime in that part of the world to describe Jesus by quoting what Jesus said about himself. Now that is a spectacular example. It became a crime, a serious crime, big trouble, if you insisted that Jesus is who Jesus said he was. Jesus told us who he is. If you quoted Jesus, that was a crime. If you quoted Jesus on Jesus. Now, I would like to say that I think to some extent, not completely, not fully, to some extent, there's that same tendency among certain devotees. That if you describe Prabhupada in terms of his own self-descriptions, people may think that you're offending Prabhupada. Just like people thought it was an offense to Jesus to take seriously what he said about himself. Anyway, good old Christianity. I mean, the history of Christianity is spectacular. That's many more lectures. But anyway, so when Prabhupada says again that I am speaking the truth because I'm repeating what I've heard, I'm not concocting, I'm not inventing, so I personally take that very seriously. And I believe that Prabhupada is speaking absolutely and infallibly when in fact he is quoting scriptures. So, for example, the idea there's one sun in the universe. Krishna says in the Gita that the sun eliminates all this jagat. Now the word jagat may mean universe, but it may mean the world. For example, Jagat Guru is not a guru of the universe, it's just a guru on earth. It's a world guru. So the word jagat, one of the standard meanings of the word jagat is earth, or just a world. And so when Krishna says that the sun illuminates this jagat, it may mean in standard Sanskrit that the sun illumines this earth, which is actually true. So if you look, now another evidence is, if you look at the behavior of acharyas themselves, they do just disagree on this type of thing. Prabhupada himself did not feel himself required on material details to agree with everything his guru said. And if you look at all the, now you could say, well, we're not acharyas, and that's true, and therefore we should not be whimsical. I'm not saying everyone should just go out and speculate on everything and just, you don't have to accept what Prabhupada said. But I do believe Prabhupada opened up a space for those of us for whom it is important to get a reasonable understanding of things. And those of us for whom it is important to create some kind of harmony between what we have really experienced in life, what science tells us, and what the scripture tells us. It doesn't mean that we stupidly accept whatever science says, because a big, or at least a significant part of what science says is not science at all. It's what Prabhupada said it is, a bluff, regarding the origin of life, and I mean many things. I mean, the science is good, but very limited. So when I say science, I mean real science, not bluffing, not pretending you know what you don't know, like where life comes from, or what's out there in the universe, which they really don't know. I mean just normal, real science, the kind we all use. So, science, as I said, real science, not scientism, and what we just have experienced in our life, just what we see with our own eyes, which is not nothing. I mean, if for example, if I've been in ISKCON for myself now for almost 40 years, and amazing, something like 39 years old, which shows you that, I guess that's called Vedic math. Anyway, so, I mean, after doing marriage counseling, of course, some people say, if you're a sannyasi, you shouldn't do marriage counseling, which is a great idea, but not because you don't know anything about it. I mean, unfortunately, I think I know more than I wish I knew about those things because of my previous experience. But anyway, after dealing with husbands and wives for my entire adult life, in hundreds, if not thousands of cases, you learn something. You actually learn something. And so I can't just ignore all that experience. I can't just pretend that what I've experienced for 40 years I haven't experienced, or I didn't see it. I mean, there's the example, if you're walking and there's a rope, or say there's a rope and the guru says it's a snake, then you just, whatever the guru says. By the way, an example given in Buddhism also, it's just sort of a generic guru story in Asia. My question is, if you're walking with your guru, and let's say there's a real snake, and the guru says, oh, don't worry, that's just a rope. And what if that real snake that the guru just called a rope is going to bite your guru, and it's a poisonous snake? I think it'd be your duty to protect your guru, not say, well, guru says it's a rope, ropes don't bite. I believe that I'm a bona fide guru. I don't say I'm a great devotee or a great guru. I just think I think I do have the minimum qualifications, if not whatever. So I believe that I do not have the power to change ropes into snakes or snakes into ropes. I sincerely believe that I just don't possess that power. And I also know that sometimes, just because we have material senses, we just get things wrong on the material level. I don't think I get theology wrong in terms of like who is God and what's the soul. I think by Prabhupada's mercy, I think I've learned that. But sometimes driving a car, like when I'm driving in my car, say with the disciple's driving, and I say turn right, and the disciple says, well, actually it's to the left. I mean, what if it really is to the left? I mean, anyone that's ever driven their guru in a car probably has had some of these experiences. So one thing I think we have to keep in mind, and that is that instructions like the guru says a rope's a snake, I think we have to keep in mind that Gurukula, which is when most people in Vedic culture had a daily relationship with the guru, in Gurukula. Because once you left Gurukula, people didn't really live under their gurus. So a lot of these instructions about how to behave toward the guru are from Gurukula, and we should remember Gurukula was elementary school. So this thing, rope as a snake, not in that language. I got the same instruction from my mother, who told me when I was growing up that when I went to school, you do whatever the teacher says. If I came home and said, oh, the teacher did this wrong, that wrong, my mother wouldn't hear of it. In our house, with myself and my three brothers, our house, the rule was you do what the teacher says. When I was in elementary school. Once I got older, I think no one could make me do what they said, but at least in elementary school, I remember as a child, just do what the teacher says, and that's the end of it. So these instructions, like you just sort of blindly follow, rope's a snake, I think those are instructions given to children that are going to elementary school. And now Prabhupada in his own life, again, I believe that in coming to see things in a certain way, that I'm actually following Prabhupada. If you look at Prabhupada in India, after he went back to India as the head of ISKCON, where he dealt with many very intelligent, very successful people, it was give and take. When Prabhupada was talking to these, like Prabhupada might be doing it, like have a certain policy, I'll give you an example. Here's a simple example. In 1976, I was Prabhupada's secretary in Mayapur, the month before the Mayapur festival, and someone in Bangladesh offered a temple to us. And Prabhupada was extremely enthusiastic, extremely excited about the idea of opening a temple in Bangladesh. I mean, after all, Jagannath Mishra, Lord Chaitanya's father, was from Bangladesh. Some of the greatest Vaishnavas in our line are from Bangladesh. So Prabhupada was very anxious to have a temple there. And I was his secretary, so he wanted myself and Srimad to go there. So we went to Calcutta, we got our Bangladesh visas, and then we came back. And Prabhupada was so anxious to send us that when we arrived back in Mayapur during the Guru Puja, Prabhupada was in the temple room on the Vyasasana receiving Guru Puja, and when he saw me walk into the temple room, he called me over to his seat and wanted to talk to me right during the kirtan, during the puja. He was so anxious. Did you get the visa? Is everything all right? Later that day, Prabhupada received a visit from Tarun Kanti Ghosh, who was an old family friend of Prabhupada, and an important person. He'd been a member of parliament. He was the owner of an important newspaper, what was it called? The Patrika, Amrita Patrika Bazar. One of the major newspapers in Calcutta. And I went in there, Prabhupada told him that this is my disciple, and he's going to Bangladesh. And this gentleman said, no, it's not a good time to go, the political situation is dangerous, and they shouldn't go now. Now, myself, with my sort of bravado, I said, well, that's okay, Prabhupada, we'll go. Prabhupada said, no, no, no. Prabhupada canceled the whole thing because of what this person said about a material issue. And Prabhupada did that often. Prabhupada often, he'd be teaching something about the material world, and if someone gave him additional information, he would stand corrected on it. So, like the Jesus case, some devotees think it is very offensive to understand Prabhupada from Prabhupada, to see how Prabhupada understood himself and how he talked about his authority and how he practically acted in terms of retracting statements he had made or changing things about material affairs, not about spiritual things. About spiritual things, Prabhupada was absolutely the immovable object. On spiritual things about Krishna, no, that was very, very different. But on material things, they're material things. So, the idea, because of Prabhupada's role in ISKCON as the Acharya, and we all joined the movement at a time, no one even knew how to keep their bodies clean, how to clean yourself after you go to the bathroom. I mean, we were just really coming from hippie background, so Prabhupada really had to sort of materially mother us or educate us how to cook, how to clean. And so because of that, I think there's a very strong impression in ISKCON that a bona fide guru is someone who is materially and spiritually perfect. It is one of the 26 qualities of a Vaishnava, not just a guru, that he's daksha, expert. By the way, from the Sanskrit word daksha, expert, we have the English word dexterity, which means expert. So, but that impression of the guru as someone who is materially and spiritually omniscient, who knows everything, who, everything from a cure for the common cold to, like a walking almanac. I would suggest this is not really what gurus were in Vedic culture. And it's not the way Prabhupada presented himself. He took on a certain role because there's no one to take care of us. But in fact, if you look at Prabhupada's teachings and the way he taught and interacted with people in India, where people were not spaced out former hippies, they were actually some of the most competent people in the world. It was very different. Prabhupada took a very relative view of his own material knowledge. He dealt with his own material knowledge in a very relative way. He was constantly changing things, correcting things, replacing things. So, as far as why most people get divorced, I would say this is something which is the province of social science. I think it's ultimately something which needs to be looked at in social science. And of course, I'm not saying Prabhupada is wrong. We should reject what Prabhupada says. But we need to see where this statement about a material phenomenon, where it fits in. Let's say it's true because Prabhupada said it. We have to see what is its niche. In what circumstances is it true? In what context is it true? And there are other contexts. It's just like if Prabhupada says a woman doesn't marry because she's a prostitute. That's true for certain women. And it's not true, I would say, for many, many women. So again, it's taking Prabhupada's statement on material things, not rejecting it, but trying to find its legitimate application. So I can't hear all of you. If anyone has a question, I don't know if you can send a chat in, or if someone could, like in Sydney, for example, if you can hear me, what you could do is go to Skype and, send a chat question on Skype, and I'll get it. And then once I get your question, I'll read it, and then I'll answer over the air through the microphone. Or anyone else is listening. If anyone's listening to this program, if I haven't chased you all away, if anyone is still listening, and you want to ask a question, if you have my Skype name. If you don't, it's Acharya Deva, my very humble Skype name, with no H, by the way, ACARYADEVA. Send me a Skype chat message, and if I get a question for you, I'll answer it. If I don't get a question in a few minutes, I guess you'll all be free. So again, I can't hear you, so I have no idea if anyone is sending a question or not. So maybe I'll just count to 20 or something. Okay, very good. Varnayika from Sydney just told me that they are preparing their questions via counterattack or something. Let's see. Curious to see what their questions will be. Again, anyone else that wants to ask a question, send me a Skype message, or if you're on Uvu or Voodoo, through any means that I can receive. Theoretically, we should be able to send chat messages through Ustream. It just doesn't seem to work very well. So when people sent Ustream chat messages, I tended not to get them. Meantime, maybe a good chance for you to go out quickly and get a Vedic soda pop or something. Or I just got one word from Sydney, you. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. They're still writing. What you may want to do is send one question in, and while I'm answering it, write the next question. So, unless this is a very long question, or unless you have a really bad keyboard. Okay, here a question that came in from Varanayaka. And if anyone else sending a question, I'll eventually get to it. So, this is from Sydney, Australia. These are native English speakers. You've said that when we are young, we should follow a teacher at the elementary school, but when you get older, you think for yourself. So is it similar in ISKCON? In certain things. I mean, Prabhupada is my eternal spiritual master. And so regarding spiritual things, he's my eternal spiritual master. For example, there's been an issue for, I could never figure out why, over the origin, how did the Jiva soul ever end up in Sydney? So that's really a question, right? How does the Jiva fall down into Sydney, Australia? Now, Prabhupada said we are all originally Krishna conscious entities. We come from Krishna. I find this to be a very powerful, true statement. And the Bhagavatam says that the only statements we have in the Bhagavatam regarding the origin of the Jiva are exactly what Prabhupada says. In the fourth canto, Krishna twice, I guess twice for people that didn't get it the first time, Krishna twice says in the Bhagavatam that you rejected me and came to this material world. You rejected me and came to this world. So according to the Bhagavatam, how did we end up in Sydney or Los Angeles or Timbuktu? We rejected Krishna. Now some people talk about a tatastha shakti, the marginal energy. The only problem with that is it's not in the Bhagavatam. And according to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, all the Vaishnava conclusions are in the Bhagavatam. Now if that we come from the marginal energy, it's not a siddhanta. It is not a philosophical conclusion. It's not in Shastra. And yet some people try to browbeat us into accepting it. And so what I say to them is, eat prasadam. So, on important spiritual matters, Prabhupada's my eternal spiritual master. Now, for example, Prabhupada liked to eat kachoris. I just personally, I appreciate the kachori. I respect the kachori. But I'm not kachori mook. And so, or regarding even certain ways, style, Prabhupada told me that. Prabhupada wrote me a letter and said, read my books and present it in your own language. And language means culture. Language means culture also. Prabhupada told me to do that. Prabhupada is not the jealous God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Prabhupada was a very down-to-earth, liberal, enlightened, great guy. Prabhupada is not a neurotic parent. He's just this perfect, great guy. And, detached. One of his opulences is he just said, yeah, I'm presenting Krishna consciousness this way. Now you read my books and go out and do your thing. Now, do your thing means within boundaries. Within boundaries. Just like, for example, there's that famous story which I think is not in the Ramayana, but never mind, still a nice story, where Lakshman drew a ring for Sita and said, you will be safe inside this circle. Prabhupada drew a circle, and we are safe inside that circle. But inside that circle, you can have, you can do your thing. So, now, to clarify, if we read something in Srila Prabhupada's purports that is different from our life experience, does that mean we can consider Srila Prabhupada's purports are fallible? Doesn't it that opens us up to interpreting Srila Prabhupada's purports incorrectly? I think it depends on, I'm not saying Prabhupada's purports are fallible, but if Prabhupada says, for example, that women like men who are expert in rape, I've met many, many women, I'd say the vast majority of women that I've met in life do not want to be raped. And I have met many women who have a much more favorable attitude toward men who are somewhat aggressive if it's the case that they are attracted to the man. If a woman finds a man attractive, I would say in general, not all women, everyone's different, but I would say generally, as a rough generalization, when a woman is attracted to a man, she prefers the man be a little aggressive and take the initiative and not be like a woman. I mean, I don't want to get into all the gory details of mating rituals, but if a man is attracted to a woman and she's sort of a regular woman and he turns out to be kind of shy and effeminate, or it's not a great thing. So there are some women, frankly, I guess, there's even a joke about this in that Monty Python movie, The Holy Grail, where these women were cloistered. They were sort of, in the Middle Ages, there were a lot of involuntary nuns, and they were these, in this castle. They were just kind of like they're wild. They had all these fantasies about some men coming and taking advantage of them. So undoubtedly, there are some women who would not be disappointed if some man just came and whatever. But that's not most women. And what does the word rape mean there? What's the history of the word rape? What did rape mean in Victorian English, and so on? So what I'm trying to do is not say Prabhupada's purports are fallible. I'm trying to say that we have to contextualize things, which Prabhupada himself does. Because Prabhupada himself will say one thing here and one thing there. So it seems to me Prabhupada himself is setting the example that we have to look at everything Prabhupada says on a particular subject and then figure out what's the big picture here. And also, if it turns out, it seems to me that it would be absurd to say that every unmarried woman, every woman that's not married is a prostitute. That would be absolutely absurd to insist upon that as a categorical, absolute truth, no footnotes, no contextualizing, nothing. It's just a simple, absolute truth. So, or that women like men who are expert in rape, or that the population of women is always greater. Prabhupada, for example, said that, not in a purport, but in a conversation, that homosexuality is so degraded, you don't even find it among animals. But we do find it among animals. So, like in the case here, where Prabhupada says generally it's a woman's fault if there's divorce, I really would want to know what social science says about that. Now, of course, in social science, they may feel it's okay for a woman just to kind of, say whatever she wants to the husband. You don't have to be nice or anything. So I would filter the social science so I could see, what's going on there. But, so no, I don't reject what Prabhupada says. But I'm following Prabhupada's own example in two ways. Number one, I'm following Prabhupada's own example in contextualizing what he says, because Prabhupada does create context in which he says various things about the same topic. And I'm taking Prabhupada very seriously when he says, I am speaking infallibly when I repeat Shastra. Now, if my question to people would be, when Prabhupada says, I am absolute when I'm repeating Shastra, is that a fallible statement? Because if it turns out to be the case that Prabhupada is infallible when he's not quoting Scripture, then Prabhupada's statement is wrong. Because Prabhupada clearly said hundreds of times that the reason what I'm saying is infallible is because I'm quoting Shastra. If you say that no, Prabhupada's infallible even when he's not quoting Shastra, that means you didn't take the first statement as infallible. So I think any way you look at it, you're going to end up with having to contextualize something that Prabhupada said. And of course, I think that obviously you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. You can very easily ruin your spiritual life by thinking you know more than Prabhupada. But I believe, I think on reasonable grounds, that I am following Prabhupada, that Prabhupada knows and understands what I'm doing, and that somehow what I'm doing is acceptable to Prabhupada, and that my motive is to just be able to authentically give myself to Krishna and to be able to carry out the very first order Prabhupada gave me, which became the theme of my life, which is to present Krishna consciousness to educated people. And so for my own, I can tell you very frankly, for my own sanity, for my own well-being, I have to come to a reasonable understanding of what I'm doing, of Krishna consciousness, that just makes sense to me. And I feel I have to be able to present Krishna consciousness in a reasonable way to other people. That's just something which I need to do. And maybe some people think that eventually, someday I'll advance more and have a more enlightened perspective on it. But at least at this point in my life, I have to say that's just where I am. And I'm not sure that it's just Maya. I mean, it's not obvious to me that that's Maya. Okay, no question from Brigu. From Bhagavati, please don't stop talking, although I can't figure a question now. Well, make an offer I can't refuse. Offer me some money. Let's see, next, from, Kandamba. Am I speaking with them? Yes. Oh, this is an old message. Okay, obsolete. Anandamukhi, thank you so much for the darshan for clarifying the intelligence level at Srila Prabhupada's. Okay. So any other questions from Sydney? Anything else from Sydney? Oh, maybe there is another thing here. Okay, there is something more from Sydney here. Should new devotees just follow like the elementary school? My experience is that there is a significant number, I don't want to say most devotees, I don't want to say everyone, not even most devotees, but there is a significant number of devotees who, in their dealings with me, have come back to ISKCON or have been able to stay in ISKCON because they felt that they could be in ISKCON or come back to ISKCON and not give up their own intellectual integrity. So, Prabhupada said religion and philosophy need to stay together. I am an eternal follower of Srila Prabhupada. I am devoting myself exclusively to his service, serving his mission. I accept him as a pure devotee from the spiritual world, and his Krishna conscious teachings are the guiding light of my life. I understand everything based on his teachings. So, at the same time, I believe that I am following Prabhupada. So as far as how we present things to new devotees, inevitably, there are different kinds of devotees. There are devotees who are sort of the Gaudiya Vaishnava equivalent of true believers, and they believe every word is literally true, even though the Chaitanya Charitamrita says there are certain illusory stories in the scriptures, and the Vaishnava commentaries say that, like for example, Rahu swallowing the sun and the moon. In their commentaries, the acharyas say, well, that doesn't really happen, that's just a story. So, I believe that I am following Prabhupada. As far as what we tell new devotees, I think we should begin by telling them that Prabhupada's a pure devotee from the spiritual world who's saving all of us. I would start with that. Some people, I think it depends on the devotee. I mean, certain people are very simple. All they want to know is Prabhupada's perfect, and they'll chant Hare Krishna, and they'll go back to Godhead. They'll actually go back to Godhead. Some people need a more philosophical explanation. So I think the general rule with new devotees, or old devotees, or medium devotees, is to just give them what they need to be strong in Prabhupada's service. Now, next question. To clarify, if we read something in Srila Prabhupada's purports, I already did that. Actually, I just skipped the one about elementary school. Next one. Does Srila Prabhupada refer to intelligence as spiritual intelligence, the ability to see a difference between spirit and matter, not the ability to multitask? Well, no. He just says intelligence, and he doesn't really. Now, I have seen that in certain ways, women seem to be more conscious of their bodies. I mean, most men don't paint their toenails, for example. And that's something I'm still trying to get my head around, that one, painting your toenails. But I just accept that there's different, people are different. And somehow it makes sense to a large number of women. So I've accepted men and women are different. At the same time, I've seen innumerable cases where a woman stays in Krishna consciousness and a man goes. I've seen probably hundreds of couples where the woman was absolutely more intelligent than the man, spiritually and sometimes materially. I mean, consider this. Here's an argument, which I think is a strong argument. Krishna was in the world for about 125 years, I believe. Now, undoubtedly, every single day, Krishna did many amazing things. I can't believe that Krishna, there was like days that went by and there was really no news coming out of Krishna. Well, what's Krishna done last week? Nothing interesting. I don't believe that. I believe that Krishna did many very interesting things every day. And if you accept that, and then look at how many leelas, pastimes we have in the Bhagavatam, it's obvious that the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam gives us, a little bit of the 11th canto, gives us a tiny, tiny fraction of everything Krishna did on the earth. Now what that tells me is that the pastimes that made the cut into the Bhagavatam, these pastimes have been highly selected. It's not just like someone was following Krishna around, writing down everything he did. That's not the way it worked. Someone, in this case Shuka, H.D. Goswami, or Vyas, or Sutta, people, very, very intelligent, enlightened people, made an extreme selection where they basically left out most of what Krishna did. And really, because it wouldn't fit, they gave us the highlights. What that tells me is that if something is in the Bhagavatam, it was selected because it's really important that you know this. So one of the things it's really important you know it is that the wives of the Brahmins, the Brahmana Patnigan, where the men were less intelligent than their wives. Krishna's boyfriends were hungry. That shows they were, bona fide devotees, because that's the sign of a real devotee. He's hungry a lot of the time. So Krishna's cowherd boyfriends were hungry, and Krishna said, go ask for some prasadam from that sacrifice. The Brahmins, the men were clueless. They didn't get it. They didn't know who Krishna was, didn't appreciate his pure devotee, cowherd boys. They just didn't get it. But the women totally got it. Now, every conceivable male authority figure told the women not to join the Hare Krishna movement. I mean, these women, their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their sons, every possible male authority figure told the women, don't go. And they all said, eat prasadam, dude. They just went. Now, why is that in the Bhagavatam? Why is that in the Bhagavatam? Is that supposed to teach us something? Anyway, so we'll finish after that question. They have to go in Sydney. I actually have to go myself. So I'd like to thank everybody very much. And the conclusion is, just to wrap up here, that yes, we should follow Prabhupada. Prabhupada is a pure devotee from the spiritual world. He is our eternal teacher. We should take what he says in his books very seriously. But I believe that Prabhupada has authorized us and even taught us to study his books intelligently. Many devotees are not highly philosophical. Many devotees know the philosophy, but they're not highly philosophical, and if they're satisfied and happy and strong spiritually, just chanting Hare Krishna and reading Prabhupada's books, that's what you should do. If you need to come to a more elaborate philosophical understanding, that's also something which Prabhupada offers us. So, thank you all very much, and it's been great talking to everybody, and Hare Krishna. Hope I'll see you all soon.